welcome. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on what part of the globe you're located in today. I'm located in Canada, so I will start with good morning. And welcome to the Commonwealth Tribute to Life session, a webinar that is focused on promotion and community engagement. The purpose of this webinar today is really to highlight the UK as an example of some of the significant disparities that exist between cultural and ethnic groups regarding both demand for organ transplant and engagement in organ donation. The UK, as you can tell by my accent, I'm not in the UK, but the UK is a very diverse community, as many of you would know, and it's in a very small geographical space. And this, in conjunction with a huge bank of data that the UK is able to collect from the potential donor audits that are happening, has made this problem quite obvious. The suspicion is that the UK is probably not the only nation that's experiencing similar problems, and I can state, being in Canada, that we certainly also have similar disparities in both organ donation and transplantation outcomes for marginalized communities. That is a growing concern for us as well. And so this webinar is really an opportunity to share the initiatives that the UK is undertaking around this, and to have some dialogue and discussion about what approaches are happening with other countries. So welcome. And for those of you who may not know me, my name is Butler, and I am the Director of Organ and Tissue Donation and Transplantation with Canadian Blood Services. I'm very happy to be co-chairing this event today, and I'm going to hand it off to my lovely co-chair, Suzanne, to introduce herself.
Well, thank you, Catherine, and hello, everybody. So my name is Suzanne Roe. I'm Head of Community Engagement at NHSBT in the UK. I am very new to my role and indeed the NHS, with my previous experience of leading community engagement being in a more commercial setting. But I'm so privileged to be here today to meet you all, albeit virtually, to learn lots and increase my knowledge, and to hear from our amazing panelists. So welcome, everybody.
We have two lovely panelists today, and I'm going to start by introducing our first speaker, Kirit Modai. Kirit has a lovely profile that I'm absolutely thrilled to share. He is a kidney transplant recipient, first and foremost. He is president of the National Kidney Federation, the honorary president of the NBTA, and he's going to tell you a little bit more about those pieces in a moment. He's chair of the Lister Area Kidney Patients Association and chair of the Jain and Hindu Steering Group on Organ Donation. He's frequently spoken at All-Party Parliamentary Kidney Group, and he's written 2 manifestos for change. He's written on BAME issues, and he's going to talk a bit about that as well, and on living kidney donation. He's a member of the project board for 2 NHSBT programs, the Community Investment Scheme and the Living Kidney Transplant Scheme. Kirit received a Points of Light Award from the Prime Minister in 2018 and an MBE in the Jubilee Birthday Honours in 2022. Frankly, Kirit puts my resume to shame, and I am absolutely thrilled to hear him speak this morning. Off to you, Kirit.
Thank you.
Oh, I think we're... Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Catherine, for that very generous introduction. I'm going to be talking about 2 issues, but firstly, I want to thank the Tribute to Life project for this opportunity to share the community engagement UK model with you today. I'm representing 2 groups on this panel. The first one is the NBTA, and the second one is the NKF. The NKF is the largest kidney patients charity in the UK. Next slide, please. So the 2 areas I'm going to cover are the partnership working between NBTA and NHSBT and the Community Investment Scheme. Next slide. Let me just tell you a bit about the NBTA. NBTA stands for the National BAME Transplant Alliance, and we set this up over 10 years ago. It's an alliance of charities, community organizations, universities, and patients and so on. And it's the independent voice on ethnic minority matters. And we cover 3 areas of donation: organ, blood, and stem cell. So this was set up by 2 of us, Orin Lewis, who is the chair of the Afro-Caribbean Leukemia Trust, and myself. Next slide. In terms of partnership working with NHSBT, we have on our NBTA meetings, we have NHSBT colleagues and civil servants. But they are observer members of NBTA, very important members because we want to work in partnership with them. But we are an independent voice. Now, clearly, over the last 10 years, the journey hasn't been as smooth as one might expect for a variety of reasons. It's been a difficult journey in terms of establishing a good relationship with NHSBT. But I'm pleased to say that now we have established credibility and influence nationally, and we have excellent relationships with NHSBT. Next slide. So let me just outline some of the main areas of partnership working between NBTA and NHSBT. And to formalize this, we actually signed a formal partnership agreement between NBTA and NHSBT a couple of years ago. So the 5 main areas we're working on. Catherine mentioned data. Data is absolutely key. So NHSBT publishes an annual data report on organ donation by ethnicity. And we help in the writing of that report and publicizing that report on an annual basis. In the UK, last year, we published our 10-year strategy, meeting the need on organ donation and transplantation. And we were very closely involved in the development of that strategy. Specific area we're working on is the recruitment of specialist nurses on organ donation. Now, as you probably know, these are key frontline nurses who talk to families at a critical time when they're thinking about organ donation. And we think that it's really important that those nurses reflect the diversity we have in the UK. And at the moment, we have a big challenge in getting there. So we're advising on the recruitment of more specialist nurses from ethnic minority background. We started the piloting of the community engagement scheme in 2016. I'll talk more about that in a minute. And obviously the community engagement, which is the second part of this talk, we in fact are advising on the development of the community engagement for the future. Next slide. I'm not going to go through all of this. This is one slide from that data report, yes? And because there's a lot of information here, but that's not the focus of today's meeting. So I'm just going to highlight 3 bars. This is 2020-2021 data published in that data report. The ethnic minority population in England and Wales is estimated to be about 14%. And you see where we're doing well, where we're doing less well, and so on. I just want to highlight 3 bars here. If you look at the second bar from the left, those are the number of opt-outs in the UK. So that's last year, it stood at 27%, considerably higher than the BAME population. If you look at the third graph, those are the patients who are waiting for an organ transplant. And you see considerably higher, nearly 30% of those waiting for an organ transplant in the UK are from ethnic minority background. And then I want to look at the 5th bar from the left, and that's how many actual deceased donors we had from ethnic minority background. And you see that at 7.3%. So clearly this is highlighting the inequality by ethnicity on organ donation and a summary of the challenges we face. Next slide. So what is the model of community engagement? And there are some principles behind this, which we think are absolutely key. The first thing is that if you want to engage with the community, it's the community which needs to take the lead, not NHSBT or any other government organization. And for community groups to take the lead, we need to empower and support them. And community groups are not just waiting there to say, oh, I want to do more work on organ donation, but they're doing amazing amount of work on all sorts of things to support their community. So in a sense, you've got to convince them that this is important and support and empower them to do that. And part of the reason for this is we all know about systemic racism in the UK and the lack of trust in the NHS generally. And that trust issue comes up over and over again. So we want the right messengers from the community, giving the right messages and using culturally appropriate resources. So the first stage of this engagement was in 2016, when NHSBT asked NBTA to pilot a project. Next slide. So this project was about, it's called the Living Transplant Initiative pilot, and we were given a small amount of money to actually undertake this pilot. So the first thing we did was set up a project team. And in fact, on the report we published, you see the photos of all members of that project team. And then we said, okay, to the community groups, you submit a bid for funding, and with clear objectives, clear plans, clear budgets, and evaluation, and so on. And we went through the projects, and 7 successful projects were approved for funding. But our approach was not that here's the money, get on with it. That wasn't the approach, saying, look, we have to empower these people. Nobody had done this work in the UK before. So we appointed one experienced advisor from NBTA for each project to support them throughout the project. So while we monitored it carefully, we also give them practical advice and support from people who have experience of working in this field. And the final report on that pilot was published in 2019. The link is there. And that effectively led to the community investment scheme. Next slide. So NHSBT appreciated that the pilot was successful. So they established the community investment scheme. And this time they say, okay, let's move on to organ donation after death. So that's what the focus was. Based on the NBTA model, obviously you improve the model as you go along. We are in the 4th round of the community investment scheme. And now we cover living donation as well as deceased donation, blood donation, and stem cell donation. So the scheme is covering all 3 areas of donation. Now, clearly, we've had a big change with the opt-out law changing in May 2020. So clearly there was a big impetus to say, how do you explain the change in law to different communities and so on? So that was very much promoted through the community investment scheme. And currently NHSBT allocates over £500,000 to the community investment scheme. Next slide. Give you an idea, there are 39 projects currently running. There are 10 on blood, 14 combined organ donation and blood, 13 on organ donation only, and 2 on stem cell. And you see the range of communities which are involved in this. So the Black African and Caribbean community, the South Asian community, Pakistani, Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, etc. So all the major ethnic minority communities in the UK are involved in this project. Next slide. And what do they do? Again, it's very much for the communities to decide what they want to do. They are in the driving seat. They know their community, they know what will work and so on. But the range of things, they can organize events in the community. Obviously with COVID, many of those events had to be virtual. They can produce digital resources and use social media, podcasts. They'll do videos, use the media extensively, radio, TV, and so on. And we've had some innovative stuff. We've had a play on organ donation, which was recently performed in Leicester, for example, by the Hindu community. And we have, where we need it, because the community itself has a lot of resources itself. But it's good that the NHSBT has got the ambassador program, which Katy is going to talk about. So where we need help, we do turn to the ambassador program. Next slide. I'm just giving you a quick flavor. This is a quick summary of a project done last year by the Hindu community in Neasden, BAPS. And what they decided to do was an in-depth survey of attitudes to organ donation within the Hindu community. And they got 415 people to respond, and you see the outcome of that. Now, NHSBT have done surveys like this in the past, but they would never reach this sort of number because they haven't got the reach in the community which the Hindu temple can do. The next one is, next slide. This is a project run by the University of Wolverhampton, very much an arts project. You see the fantastic images in front of you. And this was aimed at the Sikh community around Wolverhampton. And the next slide. This is a barbershop takeover approach. A lot of the Black communities, they meet in barbershops. That's where they are, and that's where they talk about things. So this was a fantastic initiative run to promote organ donation through activities in barbershops. So you see the range of activities we've got, and there are 39 of these. So I've just highlighted a few to give you a flavor. Next slide. So where do we go from here? And we have, from NBTA and NCAF, we have clear views of where we should be taking this further. The first thing is £500,000 is a lot of money. But in the scheme of things, it's not a lot of money. Because if you get two people who are dialyzing, and instead of dialyzing, they get a kidney transplant, yes, you will save £500,000 from those two patients in a very short time. So the first thing we're saying is that there's huge potential to increase the overall funding for this. And part of the reason is that the majority of the applications we get are not successful. And some need more support in actually developing their submissions because they're new to this and so on. So we need to improve that. But there are lots of communities out there who are disappointed because they have not been successful. And they're so enthusiastic because this might be the first time they're submitting a bid for some funding from a statutory body. The other area we need to look at is these have been annual cycles, and that doesn't help. Every year you've got to bid, and it takes time to sort out the bidding and then the contracts and all the usual sorts of things. We need to think about multi-year funding. Doing this on an annual basis is just not efficient. And then there are groups. I mean, this has been running for over 5 years now. There are community groups now who have an excellent record of delivery. And I think NHSBT know that, we know that, which are the very successful community groups. Next slide. And what we're suggesting is establish long-term funding arrangements with these successful community groups over a number of years, so they don't have to keep on applying every year and going through the bureaucracy of that. But you do need to set aside funding for new groups and for innovation, because there's so many ways you can actually promote donation of all types. The other area where we need to do better is the evaluation of each phase of the scheme. And we're a little behind on that. And I think because we're not sharing the good practice which is happening out in communities. And there are fantastic resources which are being produced by the community investment scheme. There are videos and podcasts and all sorts of things, and we're not sharing them effectively nationally. We need to promote those nationally so people can share them and not repeat the same thing and so on. And we need a rigorous evaluation of the model, probably an academic based evaluation to see, we know it's successful, but we want to know how successful is it and what do we move this to in the future. Next slide. So in conclusion, I want to say that in the UK, as in many countries across the world, the effect of the pandemic has been severe. And we know that in the UK, ethnic minorities, communities have suffered significantly more from the pandemic. And that is a huge influence on the work we're doing. The impact of the Black Lives Matter is so great that everything we talk about, I think those are the two areas we need to keep thinking about as we develop this. And in fact, when the COVID vaccinations were being promoted in ethnic minority communities, it was great to see that the government used this model effectively, saying, let's get vaccinations in temples and in gurudwaras and in Black churches and so on, and use the community to get the message. So I think people realize that that's the only way of addressing myths and tackling this issue about trust, which I mentioned. We clearly took a big hit in terms of organ donation during the pandemic. And we know that hospitals did amazing work to actually keep organ donation going. But the reality is we're behind. We have to recover. And the recovery of organ donation transplantation has to take this approach as well. You've got to involve the communities in that process. So for example, our focus now nationally is on organ utilization. How do we make sure that every potential organ available for donation is used for transplantation as far as possible? So that's our next area, and use this model to actually promote better practice in organ utilization. And the last slide. These are the contacts. We've got the websites for the two organizations I mentioned, and there's my email address if you wish to contact me. Thank you, and I'm pleased to hand over to Suzanne.
Well, thank you so much, Kirit. Oh, please forgive me.
The life of being on Zoom calls.
Perfect timing.
Oh, I think we've lost, we may have lost Suzanne, and she was going to introduce you, Katy.
Yeah,
so Katy, I was going to say, I don't have your profile. Would you, oh, there's Suzanne back again. Wonderful. Just in time to introduce Katy, Suzanne.
Oh my goodness, yes, forgive me for that interruption. So thank you so much for that fantastic presentation, Kirit. I know the audience will have really enjoyed it, and I learned a lot too. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who is very inspiring. So Katy Portell is a heart valve recipient and donor family member. She is the Organ Donation Ambassador Program Manager for NHS Blood and Transplant, creating and developing the first national volunteer scheme to promote organ donation in the UK. She was also the Volunteer Program Coordinator for Southwest Transplant Alliance in Texas, one of the largest organ procurement organizations in the US. Katy began her career as a volunteer herself, working with 3 different Donate Life organizations for nearly 10 years in the US and presenting 2 TED Talks on her personal story. So with that introduction, I'd like to hand over to Katy.
Thank you so much, Suzanne, and thank you everyone for joining today, and Kirit for an excellent presentation that will be a challenge to follow. Bear with it, I get my slides up and do the typical, can I check and make sure they're working moment? But it looks like a thumbs up. Yes, I've got a nod from Suzanne. Brilliant. So thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And I'm thrilled today to join you to really overview another community engagement model that NHS Blood and Transplant is using in the UK to engage in community education and engagement to raise awareness for organ donation across the country. And this is the Organ Donation Ambassador Program, which is a national volunteer scheme and a volunteer model. So I'm going to just introduce a little bit more about my own story and then overview for all of you today what the Ambassador Program is, a bit of the history and how we got to where we are today. And then as I was reflecting a bit on who the audience might be for this, I've also put down some thoughts for perhaps advice if other countries are considering this type of model, which I hope would be useful. And I do want to, before I go in any further, acknowledge and shout out, because I know a few of our ambassadors are on the call today. I know I saw Satya's name and Harsha, Keith, and I think Lynn possibly as well. So hello and shout out. A few of our ambassadors are on the call, so they can also, of course, chip into the Q&A or chat with their own thoughts. But to get started, I wanted to start by sharing a bit more of my own personal story, which Suzanne mentioned, as a heart transplant recipient. And the reason I like to start with this is really kind of the core of why we have the ambassador program and why we look to recruit, train, and engage volunteers who have a personal connection to donation, is because there are powerful stories to be shared that can really help communities have that light bulb moment and understand donation. And I've seen this myself personally. I received a heart valve transplant during open heart surgery when I was 4 years old. And that was a surgery to correct several different congenital heart defects which had been impacting me and was limiting my quality of life. That surgery was a success because of that tissue transplant. And all of the years I've had since then have been thanks to my incredible donor and my donor family, who I had the great honor of meeting 5 years ago. So the photo there is of me hugging my donor mom for the first time. And my hero and the hero of my story is the little boy in the middle named PJ, who actually told his family that he wanted to donate a kidney when he learned about living kidney donation. So we talk about the impact and this dynamic between raising awareness of living donation and deceased donation, and they really can inspire each other. And PJ was quite incredible and went to his mum and said, I want to donate a kidney because I only need one. And of course his mum had to say, okay, you're a child, you need to, maybe when you're older. But when PJ was very suddenly in an accident at 8.5 years old, and when nothing more could be done for him in hospital, his family supported his decision and carried out his wish to be an organ and tissue donor. And that is why I am here today. I'm here because of PJ. A few years ago, I unfortunately experienced the donor family side of organ and tissue donation when my family lost my cousin Mark very suddenly and tragically in an accident. And while it's still very, very raw and very hard to think of him not being here, the fact that he had signed up to be a donor on his driving license and was able to go on and save many lives is a comfort. It's a point of comfort and something to reflect on and a positive to reflect on. So I've been touched kind of by both sides of donation, and I started to share my own story as a recipient first before I even knew you could contact your donor family, before I knew who PJ was. So I have seen firsthand when I started volunteering that light bulb moment when you are sharing a personal story, when we share these powerful testimonies about donation, and you see the person you are talking to get it. You see them start to understand the impact, and when there is someone standing before them who has been directly impacted by donation and transplantation, it makes it real, and it can provide a source of inspiration and pique curiosity as well. So it was my programs personally that led to me first working in Texas, as Suzanne mentioned in my introduction, and eventually bringing that experience over here to the United Kingdom and NHS Blood and Transplant. So just to give a little bit more context, when I talk about ambassadors and the ambassador programs, who are the ambassadors? What are we talking about? Well, it's a similar model or approach to what Kirit discussed in terms of finding the right messengers and giving them the right message, and who better to engage with our diverse and dynamic communities across the UK, then members of those communities, especially those who've been personally impacted and touched by donation and transplantation. So this is a bit more about activating individuals rather than organizations, but giving them the tools and training and support to go out into their own communities as a champion for donation. So our ambassador program is primarily composed of passionate donor family members, transplant recipients and their families, living kidney donors, both those who have donated to loved ones, who have donated through our kidney sharing scheme, and who have donated anonymously in non-directed donation, and healthcare professionals, so those who maybe haven't personally been impacted by donation and transplantation, but certainly have seen their patients impacted positively or cared for donor families. So these ambassadors volunteer, they give of their time freely and share their passion and their stories to promote organ donation education in their communities across the UK. And in particular, taking our national campaigns or whatever we're emphasizing on a given day at a given moment and localizing and pushing that message out into their communities. So we did run a really comprehensive recruitment process with an onboarding training and work to empower these individuals to deliver these messages across UK communities. I will go into a bit of the history of how we got to this model, just to give some context. And prior to the program, we would receive requests, NHSBT would receive requests from communities for a speaker, for an information stand on organ donation, and those requests were being directed to our specialist nurses, who Kirit mentioned earlier. Specialist nurses in organ donation are the frontline staff who are working with donor families and hospitals to facilitate donation. So as you can imagine, they have a lot of other priorities and things going on that they would often need to prioritize, serving families and managing those hospital relationships. So we couldn't fulfill all of the opportunities that were coming our way, the requests for information, as much as many of the SNODs tried and really were everywhere that they could be. So at this time, volunteer programs were incredibly active in the States. Certainly that was the model and I think the inspiration, as I understand, in the initial research which was done to kind of propose a volunteer scheme was based on the US model. Each of the 58 organ procurement organizations in the States and their Donate Life counterparts have a volunteer program of some shape, size, and use volunteers quite actively. So that inspired this to be written into the 2020 strategy, to develop a community volunteer scheme that would support committees, local groups, local specialist nurses, and especially engage with groups with little tradition of donation on the subject of donation with awareness and education. So this was the initial kind of line in the strategy that created my role and created the program. It's worth noting that the program was also written into our next strategy, the 2030 strategy, emphasizing the importance of the program and the role it will continue to play. And I want to give a special shout out, because I know he's on the call, to Dale Gardner, who has been a tremendous support of the Ambassador program and made sure it stayed in the strategy, because it is key for us to have these community voices and these champions. So this is just a little bit of quick history. We did start the program with a pilot in 2018 and recruited 30 ambassadors. It was certainly a pilot, lots of learnings at that stage. And I want to explain the map just briefly that you're seeing, because this is the UK down. I think was mentioned in the introduction, a rather small territory, but certainly very diverse and dynamic, and lots going on. So the different colored segments you see here are where our specialist nurses are. So we've divided the program into regions as a way to organize the program, but specifically because these ambassadors were going to be supporting the local specialist nurses, and especially picking up the activity and trying to relieve some of the burden of having to do that extra community education and speaking engagements. We've activated by region. So that's what those regions are. That's the regions our nurses are kind of divided into in their territories. We developed the initial recruitment, training, and operations model for the program, very bespoke to the NHS, lots of challenges because there were lots of tick boxes, lots of hoops to jump through, and lots of learnings in that first pilot. But we had our first core group of ambassadors who started to share their testimonies, organize and generate opportunities, as well as start to cover the opportunities which were already coming our way that we prior to that just couldn't necessarily cover and would be missed opportunities in the community. Some of the earliest challenges in learnings from that pilot was the recruitment process and getting that right. Because we do have an application process, we want to make sure that the ambassadors are trusted voices in the community who will take on board our messaging and can communicate it in a very sensitive way and a culturally appropriate way. But the recruitment process, I think, was a bit intense the first time through, but also awareness in the profile of the program. It took some time for us to get it out there and let the different regions know when it was coming their way. We did expand in 2019 and brought in another 3 different regions were activated, groups of ambassadors coming along and being trained in the north of the country. So this was our second recruitment and expansion, and this was the last recruitment that we were able to do before the pandemic struck and paused everything. So currently, as the program stands, we have more than 60 active ambassadors across 5 regions of the country. In each region, the ambassadors support local community engagement, supporting speaking engagements and information stands, but also wear multiple hats, supporting local organ donation committees. As Kirit mentioned, the ambassadors also support the CIS scheme, Community Investment Scheme. Some of them are also involved in other charities, or also have other hats that they wear, and do far more above and beyond than just the requests for a speaker that we might get into our program. But this is what the current landscape looks like. And to get a bit more into detail of what these ambassadors do and the scope of what they do, primarily, I suppose the core of what they bring that is so incredibly powerful is themselves, is their own personal accounts of whether it's donation or transplantation or a different experience that, as I said at the beginning, can bring the message home when they are engaging in the community and make it really real. One of the most powerful ways to engage the public with the topic is these powerful stories. But also, the ambassadors receive regular communication from us on our campaigns, our messaging, the latest calls to action if we shift our strategy, which we have done. In the lead up to the law change in 2020, our ambassadors were key in spreading education and awareness of the change in law and helping communities to understand that the law change was coming and what it meant, and subsequently after the change in law, again, helping to educate communities. We then shifted our strategy to really focus on the importance of family conversations around donation when we started to receive feedback that while people made their donation decision, if they hadn't conveyed it to their family, that really leaves the family in the dark when a specialist nurse goes to approach them and donation is actually a possibility, and it can be much more difficult for families to support and agree to donation if they've not heard from their loved ones. So again, the ambassadors took on board our kind of shift in focus and emphasized the importance of family conversations. So all along, these volunteers are adapting and changing to the changing landscape in our marketing strategy. So primarily the activities they do, especially initially, will take the shape of speaking engagements, now both in person and virtual, and promotion stands, which might be at a community fair, in a hospital lobby, at an organization, anywhere someone will let us set up a table and talk to strangers about organ donation. We can try and get a stand there. But one of the things I like to point out is that when the ambassadors are speaking, especially in those stands or even the speaking engagement where there's a Q&A, it's a powerful two-way communication. So there's not only the personal testimony, but there's also myth busting, there's education. It's this coupling, and I will go into that kind of model in a moment, but it is a really dynamic conversation with whatever community we're engaging with. The ambassador program has also allowed NHSBT to provide a high level of quality service or customer service to communities who are asking for this information, where we now have a place to direct those queries, which is the ambassador program, linking in all the while with other members of the marketing team, external affairs, community investments, SCAPE. Just there's so many pieces to the puzzle. But ultimately trying to capture every opportunity that comes our way to engage with communities and raise awareness. And then the ambassadors go beyond that to proactively network within their own communities and look for opportunities to engage. We're starting to really explore a more proactive model, going out into schools. How can we engage councils? Can we engage GPs' offices and so forth? And as Kirit mentioned previously, the ambassadors are not in isolation from the community investment scheme. Many of them are judges or advisors or even project leads of community investment scheme projects. So this is, it's this very much always working together in collaboration with the many different engagement models that we have going on in the UK. And above and beyond the kind of standard speaking engagements and stands, our ambassadors are there when we need a focus group to bounce ideas off of, when we have a press opportunity, a media opportunity that comes our way, because they engage with the topic so regularly, they're really professional and often very keen to be able to speak to the media, to engage with other partners, to be part of our content when we are creating content. So the ambassadors are involved in so many different facets of our marketing. It's become a real resource for the marketing team. And we're very grateful to them always for how open they are and willing they are to share a deeply personal and emotional experience with us and to let us amplify that out into communities. So that's quite a wordy slide, I know, but that's because the ambassadors do so much. And I can't talk about the program without first touching on 2020 and how things shifted. I'm sure everyone experienced very similar challenges. We were just preparing to expand the team when the pandemic struck. Many of our ambassadors as transplant recipients found themselves in the most clinically extremely vulnerable group and were shielding. We paused our recruitment plans, we paused all initial activity, risk assessed, and had to go fully virtual for a while. So now the program operates in a bit of a hybrid model because the world is virtual. We don't need to get together in one room to have a webinar or a meeting like this, and it will remain a bit of a hybrid. But I think if I were to sort of summarize some of the impact of an ambassador program, and I suppose this is a little bit of my pitch to anyone who is considering possibly using this form of activation, is that the ambassadors are a visible, credible source of information now in their communities. Some of them, many of them, are being approached directly because they are recognized as someone who can speak on organ donation. They've also opened doors and allowed NHSBT's messaging to reach audiences we wouldn't otherwise have reached, including getting us invitations to events that we wouldn't have even known about otherwise. I mentioned before, this provides a higher level of customer service, but there's also providing cultural insight and valuable feedback because they're members of these communities and can present the information in a way that's appropriate and sensitive to different cultures or just to different cultures of a specific community or area of the country. Most importantly, of course, it's their powerful testimonies. And this is where I kind of look at this as their personal stories and their passion is this foundation of what just makes them such exceptional advocates for us to engage with. And then on top of that is layered the knowledge, the understanding of organ donation, of the myths and how to address it, key messages, ways of talking to someone about donation, and then additional training and skills, because the more you speak on the subject to random people, the more you learn about how to engage with someone on the subject. So it all just layers up into an advocate that when they meet a member of the public are going to be able to engage in a really dynamic two-way discussion. And this is very, very simplified, but something that we cover in the ambassadors training is the fact that anyone who engages with our ambassadors is going to come to us somewhere along this spectrum of understanding. They might be completely opposed to donation for some reason, and we won't be able to get our messaging through to them. But most people come and engage, and they're somewhere in the middle. Maybe they're unsure, they have questions, they haven't really thought about it, or they have some concerns. And because of the ambassadors, both, again, that's that personal connection, the knowledge and the training can assess where someone's at. And the goal is to move them along that journey of understanding, right? So even if we don't get them to the point where they're ready to register and talk to their family, which is the ultimate goal, if they leave an engagement with an ambassador, having been inspired, their curiosity piqued, and maybe a little bit more open to the conversation than they were when they approached, then that's a win. So we continue to move the public along in a more bespoke and in-depth way, whereas advertising is a one-way message. The ambassadors are as a two-way communication. So just to summarize, and again, I think this is just if anyone's kind of hasn't used this model and is interested, getting started would be to really consider making sure that the recruitment process is welcoming and informative. There's clear expectations set of what the role is and what is expected. You need to have support in place. We're asking ambassadors and volunteers to share personal and emotional experiences, but also these are challenging discussions for them to have with members of the public. So that's where myself and my colleague Sandy, who works and manages all of the day-to-day of the program and works exceptionally well, especially one-to-one with the ambassadors. It's about making sure that they have that constant support because it is quite a challenge, and we want to continue to nurture the passion and the skills that they have. So establishing methods of recognition as appreciation, because we are very appreciative. We just passed National Volunteers Week, which was a wonderful time to reflect on the incredible work that the ambassadors do and what they give back to our organization. So yes, a few more being ready to adapt and ready to really commit to investing in that program. So I know that getting near to Q&A time, I'm curious, anyone else's experience with activating volunteers? Do you currently have a volunteer program, or are you thinking of starting one? How does it work in your country? Would be curious to know. I do have my information there. And again, once again, a massive shout out to the ambassadors who are on the call, and also a shout out to my colleague Sandy, with whom this program would not be the success that it is today. And Dale Gardner for his continued support as well. I think that concludes my presentation.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Katie. Thank you for sharing your story and also sharing those really inspiring slides about the Ambassador Programme. Dale mentioned on the chat that we are very lucky to have you. I'm not sure if you've, at NHSBT, I'm not sure if you've seen that comment, but he's absolutely right. So thank you. And in the chat, we also had Satya, who's one of the ambassadors, who would like to share his experiences of being an ambassador. So I'll hand over to you if that's okay, Satya.
Thank you very much. Two excellent presentations, difficult to follow. I think Katy presented the case of ambassadors very well in terms of what they do, how they do it, when they do it, and everything that needed to be said about ambassador. But as an ambassador, how did I feel? I was working for organ donation for the last 30 years in a voluntary capacity, but being an ambassador provides credibility to the role. So when you say I'm an ambassador, people don't really follow an ambassador. They think you are ambassador of NHSBT. I'm perfectly happy with that misunderstanding. But more importantly, it provides the platform for sharing the knowledge and information, because NHSBT provides updates not only for organ donation, but for other related areas. For example, my knowledge about stem cell donation is very poor. And I'm not really that au fait with blood donation, but there are seminars, there are presentations which are brought in for tissue donation, blood donation, and other areas which we find very, very helpful, because they update us about those questions which are sometimes raised during the presentations. And the other thing is that the platform which has been created by Katy and Sandy in terms of communicating with each other, and there are monthly meetings where we can raise, these are the areas of concern that we need to know more about. Those are brought in as well. So overall, it's a fantastic experience. And I encourage anyone who is thinking of joining to seriously consider this. And you don't have to be just the donor family or the recipient person, because I'm neither. I'm just a doctor, a retired doctor, but happy to be a volunteer. And having learned a little bit about organ donation, happy to share the information and knowledge that I've gathered. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Satya. And I think your statement of "I'm just a doctor" might be the understatement of the year, given what I know you've given to this community and continue to give. But that was, it's wonderful to hear the actual lived experience of an ambassador who's passionate and who's out there, you know, on the ground doing that piece of work. And I think it was a great way to tie up Katy's presentation in terms of kind of moving into the lived experience of the work. Again, on behalf of the Tribute to Life campaign, thank both of you so much, and also use that for sharing your experiences. I think that this has been wonderfully educational, and it has piqued a number of questions actually in our question and answer section. So I'm going to, if Kirit and Katy are okay with that, I'm going to go into some of those questions, and I think it's going to lead to some further great discussion. The first question we have is living organ donation. How is this, and is this included in the program? And does it include encouraging consideration of deceased donation?
Yeah, if I can pick that up, Catherine, I think.
Wonderful.
As I said to you, we started this approach started with living kidney donation. And in the first years, we were working with the community just to raise awareness about living kidney donation. What is living kidney donation? Yes. Who can donate? Why is, for most patients, getting a living kidney transplant better than having a deceased donation, for example? How do you get a potential living donor from your family? How do you raise that subject, and so on? So there are issues like that. But we've learned over the time that the target audience for living donation now, we think, is slightly different. So our latest work, which we're doing, we're targeting those patients in hospitals, yes, who are on what we call the low clearance unit. So those are people who are not quite ready for dialysis or transplantation, but on the verge of it, yes, they're just thinking about options. So the approach we're taking, so for example, I'm working with the Royal Free Hospital in London at the moment, where we have appointed 2 ethnic minority outreach workers to give one-to-one support to people who are thinking about dialysis or transplant options, telling them about living donation, supporting them in finding a potential donor, and so on. So what we've learned is the target audience for living kidney donation is very different. For deceased donation, we want everyone to know about it because we want everyone to sign up and be considered as a donor when they pass away, if they're over 18 and so on. So I think we've learned over the period that whilst they both fall under the Community Investment Scheme project, yes, the approach is very different.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kirit. Katy, or I didn't know, Katy, if you had anything you wanted to add to that, or if we want to move on to the next question, maybe Suzanne, because we've got several.
We do, and one of the questions on there is actually about the ambassador program, Katy. I think it's sort of been stimulated by 2 very inspiring and informative presentations. So some great questions in here. So for you, Katy, one of the questions is: have the ambassadors counselled for tissue or organ donation?
Oh, yes, that's a great question and very well timed, actually. I kind of assumed by counselor, meaning that they've been trained on tissue. That's something that we have given an overview presentation. Satya mentioned these monthly calls we've started to do. Sometimes we use those calls just to get feedback from the ambassadors and touch base, but sometimes we've had guest speakers on. So there was a presentation overviewing tissue donation. However, as an organization, we're actually going through a process of bringing organs and tissue services closer together. They joined recently. So it is conversations we're starting to have with tissue services is how do we integrate tissue messaging into the organ donation ambassador program? How do we start? And even as a marketing team, we're starting to have these questions of how do we promote organ and tissue donation side by side now that the services have merged, which is very interesting for me because in the States, from the public messaging perspective with the Donate Life affiliates, it is all organ and tissue donation is one. Whereas here it has so far been kind of promoted separately, and that tends to be because the services were separate and therefore the funding, the resource, the staffing for promoting those different types of donation was different. So we're coming to this one donor model as an organization and starting to really think of how do we promote all forms of donation side by side. So we're in the beginning conversations of how do we move forward and integrate that tissue donation messaging. In the UK, our tissue services are a little bit targeted. There are certain areas where we have tissue recovery services more heavily. So there's also an element of lining up kind of geographically. That said, and as a tissue recipient myself, I'm an advocate for tissue donation being a normalized part of the conversation anyways. Our ambassadors are really keen. We also had a presentation on cornea donation and are really keen to start to integrate that messaging. So we're just at the start of working at how to do that really effectively. So more to come on that certainly, but it is an important and a really good point and a good question because the program started in organ donation services, which is now organ and tissue services. So we've got a transition to make.
Thank you, Katie. Catherine, do we have time for one more question out of the Q&A?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, we do actually. There is a question here, and I suspect it's probably on the minds of many. And the question is that there's been a lot of mistrust around vaccines. That is not a UK issue. That is a global issue. I can attest that we experience the same in Canada. And it's been spread quite a bit, through social media. We know Facebook, WhatsApp in some communities has also provided the venue for this. And the question is, does this also happen with transplant in terms of that miscommunication, mistrust? And if so, any thoughts on how we can approach reducing the impact of that mistrust?
Again, if I start off on that, Catherine, I think the issue about trust, as I said, is really very much a key issue for all of us to address. And I think, in a sense, if you look at the data I was referring to earlier, in terms of the higher proportion of people from ethnic minority background opting out, yes, of the register in the UK, is an indication of the mistrust, despite all the messaging we've been talking about and so on. And I think the only answer to that is to enhance this approach, really, to get the right message from the right messenger and expand this service, really. That's what I was thinking about, because I think getting somebody from the community to talk about the issues and taking a leadership role in that, I think that is the key. As far as transplant is concerned, I think, again, we do find that there are inequalities in transplantation in the UK. I haven't touched on this, but just to give you one example, that if you're from ethnic minority background, your chances of getting onto the transplant waiting list are lower compared to somebody from a white background. Now, again, that's been there for a long time. So we do have to, there's some systemic issues as well, yes? So I think a combination of addressing the systemic inequalities we have and then getting the communities involved in getting the right message. You're never going to get everyone convinced, but I think you will get the vast majority of people convinced and reduce this level of mistrust.
That was an excellent response, Kirit. Thank you, and very informative. I suspect it resonates again, being from Canada, your thoughts and ideas certainly resonate as we experience many of the same impacts. I recognize, I know that there's a couple of other questions, but I'm recognizing the time and want to be able to respect the hour. So I think perhaps Suzanne, if it's okay with you, we'll wrap up, and I will thank our panelists again for excellent presentations that were chock full of information. I'm pleased I have members of my own team on the call today that I'm hoping we're really going to be able to have some fruitful conversations about what translate into the Canadian context. And I'm going to hand over the last word to Suzanne just to thanks and wrap it up.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Catherine. It's been a joy to be co-chair with you today. Just echoing your comments about the inspiring and informative presentation. So to thank Katy, thank Kirit, thank everyone for their questions and for their comments. I'm sure you'll agree it's been a fantastic webinar, and hopefully has left everybody with ideas for best practice, other community activities, and certainly given us all some insight into the fantastic work delivered by Kirit and by Katy and their teams. So thank you to everybody for giving us this hour. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I have, and wish you all a lovely, well, depending on what time it is where you are, a lovely rest of your day. So take care, everybody. Thank you.